Partial obedience has no reward. You don't know what your disobedience is costing you. When God is asking you to do certain things and you are feeling like this thing doesn't really make sense. Who are you to think what God is asking you to do doesn't make sense? 2025 is that year that we obey. 2025 is that year that we are more intentional about our calling and our assignments here on earth because destinies are attached to your obedience. Do you know how many people's prayers you are being an hindrance to because you've refused to obey God? Yes, we all have our personal agendas, we all have our personal assignments that we want to do, that our personal dreams and goals, but God's assignment is the most important. Hello, guys. Welcome back to another podcast episode on Thrive with Lanike. Yeah, yeah, it's been a while. Yeah, life happens. I've been very busy with school and managing my business, and it's all about trying to strike a balance, even though it's hard to do that. But then I believe I can do all things through Christ that infuses inner strength in me. And like I said in the previous episode, 2025 is that year that we obey. 2025 is that year that we are more intentional about doing all that God has committed into our hands to do. And 2025, baby, we're going global. Yes, we're going global this year and we have to look the parts. Yeah. So this is me showing my face again on this podcast episode. And today we're talking about obedience. And obedience is one thing that we all struggle with. I struggle with obedience. And I know some of you watching me right now also struggle with obedience at one point or another. But one thing that I have learned is the fact that God rewards obedience because God is a rewarder. And when you obey, He rewards you. Even though oftentimes when God is asking us to do certain things, we might not get the result that we are actually anticipating. We might not get the results that we are hoping to get. But most of the times, most of the times, when God asks us to do certain things, He rewards us. And, you know, it makes me question the fact that why is it always hard for us to obey? Because come to think about it, if it's your boss at work that is giving you an instruction or telling you to do certain things, it's not so hard for you to do, right? But when it is God laying things in your heart to do, you find it difficult to obey, you find it hard to obey. And one thing I have come to realize is that one of the reasons why we find it so hard to, obey God and carry out his instructions is because we feel it doesn't make sense. When God is asking you to do certain things and you are feeling like this thing doesn't really make sense, you know, just because you are looking at it from your own human perspective, based on how much you can reason, you feel it doesn't make sense. But if God is asking you to do something, it's because He has a reason for it, He has a purpose for it. And that is why it's important that we obey. So, like I said, as a matter of fact, yes, as a matter of fact, this podcast series is a result of my own obedience to God, honestly, because God has laid it in my heart for a while to do certain things, to talk about certain things, but then I felt like, no, 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 it doesn't make sense. And like thinking about it right now, it's actually quite funny that God is asking you to do something and you feel it doesn't make sense. Who are you to think what God is asking you to do doesn't make sense? But we are humans, right? But one thing I know for sure is that partial obedience is still disobedience. So if God is asking you to do certain things and you feel like, oh, it doesn't make sense, maybe God is telling you to do one, two, three, four, five things, and you feel like, no, I just want to do one, three, and five. Because in your mind, you feel two and uh four doesn't make sense. It is still disobedience. And partial disobedience has no, sorry, let me take that again. Partial obedience has no reward. So it's time we begin to obey God and carry out his instructions. Like I was saying, this podcast series is a result of my own obedience to God, because God wants me to talk about certain things that initially I was not comfortable with. I just felt like, why do I have to talk about myself? Why do I have to, you know, show myself like that and put myself out there? But one of the things I've come to realize is that there's always a reason why God is asking you to do certain things. There's always a purpose for it. And when God laid it in my heart to, start this podcast episode, it was a bit hard for me. Honestly, I struggled. I struggled. So, a little background story. I just moved to Canada, and while I moved to Canada, I got a job, which is the normal thing everybody does, right? I got a job, and I was super excited about it because I get to work in a kitchen, bake cakes, cook food, which is something I love doing so much. But I got to a point where I was no longer comfortable doing the job. I was sad, I was frustrated, and I was not even getting enough pay from the job. And then I cried and I was like, God, what is going on? What can I do? I don't like this situation that I'm in. This is something that I love doing. So why am I not finding joy in doing this anymore? Because when I first picked up the job, I was really excited. I was very happy, you know. But it got to a point I was no longer comfortable about it. So I was like, what? Why is this happening right now? What can I do? What do I need to do to, make things better? And God told me, and God asked me, what do you have in your hands? And I was like, oh, what do I have in my hands? I have my baking, definitely. That's one thing that I know how to do very well. So I was like, oh no, I don't want to go back to baking, because while I was leaving Nigeria to come to Canada, I said, when I get to Canada, I'm just going to face my studies, get a job, no more caking, no more baking. Because while I was in Nigeria running my bakery, I got burnt out at some point, was beginning to tell on my health. And I was like, no, no more business for me. And thinking about it right now, I believe that why I was in that state was because I didn't manage the business well. I didn't manage it properly. Okay. But I didn't feel like that when I was making that decision. But when I was telling God that I'm no longer going to bake when I get to Canada, God was telling me that it was like for some of you that don't understand, it's like God is like, should be deceiving yourself. He told me, he said, no, getting a job, well, but one thing I want you to know is you always be an entrepreneur. So, you know, even before I left Nigeria, I already knew that, okay, this entrepreneurship life, I cannot escape it. But while I was working at daycare and God said I should pick up my baking job again, my baking business again, I was like, okay. And the funny thing is, the moment I agreed and accepted to pick back the baking business, ah, he opened a big door for me. Like someone gifted me baking tools that was worth thousands of dollars. Like just like that. I just spoke to the person, like she was one of the first people I told about the fact that okay, I make cakes, and then I showed her my Instagram page. And when you get to my Instagram page, you see cakes that would wow you, right? So she was like, oh, you know how to bake so much. And I have some baking things in the house. If you don't mind, I have been trying to, dispose them. And if you don't mind, I can give them to you. I was like, oh, I don't mind. So I just thought, okay, I'm going to just pick maybe a bag or two of baking things, baking tools. But to my shock, to my amazement, I got there and I left with a car and a half. Like the things filled one car and another car. So you can know that it was a lot. It was a lot of things. And it made me realize that God, when God is asking us to do certain things, He backs us up. Like He backs you up when He's asking you to do certain things. God laid this in my heart to actually start this podcast episode, this podcast series. I was like, who would listen to me? I'm not so eloquent in speaking. I'm someone who prefers to put down my thoughts in writing. But then God is saying I should do this. And God is the one that equips. And the truth of the matter is, God has already equipped us with everything that we need to thrive here on earth. But there I was looking down on my own ability, looking down on my capacity, looking down on the gifting that God had already deposited inside of me. So I decided to obey because I said 2025 is the year that we obey. Is the year that we no longer struggle with obeying God's instructions and doing all that He has laid in our hearts to do. So I picked this YouTube channel up and here we are. And honestly, I know that this YouTube channel has been helping a lot of people. I know that this podcast series has helped people. Yes, we are still in the growing stage because everything grows, right? There's nothing you start that doesn't require growth. So we are still in the growing stage. And I know even when I have the thousands and millions of subscribers, it will still be a growth process. So I'm grateful that God is using my life to bless others. And one of the things that God wanted me to address on this podcast series is to encourage women, or to encourage individuals who are looking up to Him for the fruit of the womb, who are looking up to Him for children. And before God laid the idea in my heart to do it in form of a podcast series, when God first laid the idea in my heart, I was like, God, I am still waiting on you for my own children. And you are asking me to start encouraging other women or encouraging other people who are looking up to you for children. Like, I was like, who would encourage me? Who would help me? Because I also need encouragement. I also need help. I also need someone to, be there for me. But God is asking me to be there for you. So if you're watching this right now, I know that it is not a coincidence. It's either you're waiting on God for your children, or at least one person who is trusting God for their children. At least one person who is trusting God for their children. And honestly, I just feel I'm feeling so much joy in my heart right now because I'm just imagining how many lives this podcast series is going to help. So I've been married for over 8 years and I've been waiting on God for my own children. And in the early stage of my marriage, while we discovered that, okay, there were some issues that needed to be fixed medically and things that needed to be attended to, at that point, I felt disappointed. Like, God, why would I have to be in this situation waiting on you for my own children? Because I kept myself till marriage. Myself, as a matter of fact, myself and my husband married as virgins. Yeah, it's nothing to be ashamed of. We're proud of that. And so I felt like, God, we married as virgins. We kept ourselves till marriage. And people that even play around, you know, because we are always quick to judge, right? I felt like people who messed who play around and mess themselves up, get married, and before you know it, they have children. And like, why do I have to wait to have my own children? I'm supposed to just get married and have my child or have my children. And I was in that very sad state where I was constantly unhappy, you know, always crying. People see me smile on the outside, but deep down there was a sorrow and a sadness that I couldn't express, you know. But God helped me through it. And I believe that one of the ways God has helped me through this is as a result of my obedience. Now, let me shock you. This is what happened. So, there was a time that we're having baby dedication in my church back while I was in Nigeria. And I'm in the choir. So, that day I was on stage with the choir ministering. And it was time for baby dedication. And people were dancing, and as they were dancing, I was thinking in my heart, God, this couple, they just got married last year and now they have their child and they are coming to dedicate their child. What have I done wrong to you, this God? What have I done wrong? And at some point I was beginning to get teary. But you know what God told me that really broke me, that really shocked me? God said, right on that stage, God told me to thank Him, to always thank Him for blessing those people with children. That anytime I hear that somebody has given birth or somebody is having a baby's dedication or a naming ceremony, I should thank Him for blessing them with children. And I was like, God, like I was shocked because how would you ask me? You have refused to bless me with my own child, and now you're asking me to thank you for blessing someone else with a child. And at that point, I couldn't hold back my tears. I was just crying, like, God, why are you dealing with me like this? What have I ever done wrong to you? But do you know that I decided to do what God asked me to do? Thank Him for blessing people with children. And in that place of thanking Him for blessing others with children, I begin to forget about my own sorrow. Do you know why? I began to genuinely feel happy and joyous and feel excited for people who have their own children. Do you know why? Because I just feel like, oh, thank God, this is one person that does not have to deal with infertility or waiting to have a child. Because it is not everybody that can actually handle the pain of waiting. It is not everybody that can handle the victimization that comes from childlessness. I've heard stories, I've read stories, like I've heard stories, real life stories. So I know that people are going through real issues when it comes to having their own children. And so when I hear that somebody has given birth, I'm so happy that, oh, thank God this person does not have to go through the pain of waiting, because I now have a deep understanding that it is not everybody that can go through that pain. So right now I'm in a better place. I'm in a happy place. I'm no longer in that place where I used to cry and feel so sad, because just feel like God used that experience to actually work on my heart. He used that to grow me into the woman that I'm becoming. And honestly, I love this woman that I'm becoming. And this woman I'm becoming is as a result of my obedience to God. I've written two books that I've published online already. I've written two books. I've been able to impact thousands of individuals through my online baking courses, which was also a result of my obedience to God. When God laid it in my heart to start teaching others how to bake online, it didn't look like it made sense at that point, but I started. And God did not just use that to bless me financially. He also used me to impact others. Like, people literally enter my DM and pray for me and bless me and tell me how much I've been able to impact their business, how much I've been able to help them make money in their business, improve on their skills, and improve on their crafts. And really, I feel very fulfilled. I feel very privileged and honored that God would look at somebody like me and use me to do that. Like thousands of individuals all over the world. Oh God, I'm so blessed. So, the moral of today's episode is there is reward in obedience. It's high time that we begin to obey and carry out all of God's instructions for us. Whatever it is that God is laying in your heart to do, it's time for you to begin to do them. Because you don't know what your disobedience is costing you. There are prayers that you have prayed that you yourself are the hindrance to the answer to that prayer. So, it's high time you begin to obey God. It's high time you begin to carry out God's instructions. If God is asking you to write a book, write the book. Even if nobody reads it, write it and put it out there. If God is asking you to start a YouTube channel, start it. If God is asking you to, talk to someone, talk to them. If God is asking you to mend the relationship, mend the relationship. If God is asking you to end the relationship, end the relationship. If God is asking you to serve in a in a particular capacity, please go ahead and do it. Stop feeling like you're not enough. Stop feeling like you're not capable. Stop feeling like you don't have what it takes, because God has already equipped you with all that you need to do all that He has laid in your heart. So, baby, 2025 is that year that we obey. 2025 is that year that we do all that God has laid in our hearts to do. 2025 is that year that we are more intentional about our calling and our assignments here on earth, because destinies are attached to your obedience. Do you know how many people's prayers you are being an hindrance to just because you've refused to obey God? Honestly, you have to begin to do all that God has laid in your heart to do, because in doing it, you will become an answer to someone else's prayer. And this life, no matter how long we live here on earth, is very short. And that's why we have to be intentional about living an impactful life and living, you know, to fulfill God's purpose for our lives. Yes, we all have our personal agendas, we all have our personal assignments that we want to do, that our personal dreams and goals. But God's assignment is the most important. God's, you know, God's instructions is the most important. So, thank you for watching this particular episode. I'm praying for you, I'm rooting for you, and I know that we all are going to thrive in Jesus' name. So, till I see you in another podcast episode, keep thriving, and I love you. Bye.